Yes, indeed. Lent starts this Wednesday. How many folks with a Catholic background here? Everybody remembers Ash Wednesday. It was a very prominent day in the Catholic Church, and even in the Christian Church overall. Lent and Ash Wednesday is a very important observance. And every year about this time, as I look around the world, I have to wonder to myself, what meaning does Lent still have in this world that is increasingly filled with people who say that they're spiritual but not religious? Another label they use is unaffiliated, right? When they're checking off something in a listing of what religion they belong to, they say none, or unaffiliated, which means that they're not part of any organized religion, which may suggest that they're okay with disorganized religion, but that's another subject. And I get what people are saying when they tell me that they're spiritual but not religious, because I've had the same experience. They've had a bad experience with a particular religion or even denomination, so they leave that particular church or denomination or religion thinking that they're going to leave behind all the religious trappings and things like that. And yet it's interesting, because when you look at the things that the spiritual but not religious people call spiritual, it all comes from some religion or another. Doesn't matter what it is: chanting, incense, candles, prayer beads of all different descriptions, meditation. They're all the product of some religion and some religious culture somewhere in the world. And another interesting thing that I've observed about these spiritual but not religious folks is that they've rejected, they say they've rejected organized religion, but they love the Dalai Lama and Tibetan Buddhism. Now, I wonder how the Dalai Lama would react to someone suggesting that his religion isn't organized. Probably like this. He would have a good laugh at that, and I've heard that he has a good sense of humor. You see him in these laughing modes quite a bit. But there he is. There he is. Now look at him. He's wearing religious, cultural trappings. His robes. His robes are part of the Tibetan Buddhist religious culture. He has prayer beads around his wrists, which function in much the same way that a rosary does in the Catholic Church. Those are all religious symbols. And Tibetan Buddhism in particular has all sorts of rituals and rules and religious mythology, thousands of pages of sacred scripture. There's a very strict leadership hierarchy, different ranks that you can move through by study and practice, and yet I don't think anyone would say that the Dalai Lama needs to be more spiritual, would they? Which is because he's learned a really interesting trick. He's learned how to be spiritual and religious. Spiritual and religious. He can still remain grounded in his religious practices while reaching beyond them to look for some kind of practical truth that's being expressed in those practices. He recognizes that religion has both limitations and it also has value. This is something I shared before. This is from probably 6 or 7 years ago. He posted something on Facebook that caused a bit of a stir. Here's what he said. He said, all the world's major religions, with their emphasis on love, compassion, patience, tolerance, and forgiveness, can and do promote inner values. But the reality of the world today is that grounding ethics in religion is no longer adequate. This is why I am increasingly convinced that the time has come to find a way of thinking about spirituality and ethics beyond religion altogether. Now, in case you haven't guessed it, that is exactly what we do here. At that time, he got something like 142,000 likes. People liked what he's saying. And what he's saying is, don't do away with religion or pretend that it doesn't exist. Go beyond it. The problem isn't religion or the trappings of religion per se. And trust me here, the Dalai Lama is not going to throw out his robes, his incense, his sutra books and mandalas. There's no way that's going to happen. The solution isn't to throw it out. The antidote to bad religion is not no religion. It's something better. The antidote to bad religion is something better. Keep things. Keep the framework, if you must. Keep the structure. Keep the meaningful rituals. Keep a few of the old hymns if the theology isn't too ear-shattering. Keep those things. When people are ready to transition out of religion into something different, into something a little more spiritual or even secular, we have to meet them where they are. And everybody is at a little different place. And one of the worst things you can do when someone is going through that transition is to yank the rug out from underneath them and take all of that stuff away. It's a gradual process. So update if necessary. Reframe, redefine, bring these things into alignment with what we know about the world today, which, in my opinion, was the vision of Charles Fillmore. He wanted to revise and update many of the things that he found in traditional Christianity that had become a bit dry and meaningless. He once wrote this book that's called Keep a True Lent. So he was going to tackle the tradition of Lent. There was a foreword in that book which is very interesting. It was written by a Unity minister from New York in the 1930s. Her name was Georgiana Tree West. So I'm going to share a good chunk of this quote. It's a little long, but it's good. She really captures the entire essence of the book in just a few paragraphs. So here's what she says. The Christian world is once again observing the Lenten season, the season of prayer and fasting that precedes the joyous festivity of Easter. It is commonly believed that the Lenten period has to do with the events of the 40 days preceding the resurrection. This is an erroneous idea. Lent is a church institution and there is no authorization for it anywhere in the New Testament. The idea, however, has a sound spiritual basis. Lent, then, is a church institution embodying an exalted idea. The idea of cleansing and disciplining both mind and body toward the end of making them more receptive to the Christ ideas, as she calls them. Like many other religious practices, it is too often observed in letter, but not in spirit. Too many people make a fad out of Lent. It is fashionable to give up some luxuries, and when those luxuries have to do with food and drink, it is profitable physically. There is also psychological value in the mental discipline involved, but such observance has nothing to do with being a Christian. Atheists could get the same benefit. And I was struck by that line about too many people making a fad out of Lent, because that was me. 12 years in Catholic school, and every year Lent would come around and there would inevitably be some bragging among the kids out on the playground about what we were giving up. And it was usually, something simple as soda, candy, maybe some TV shows or something like that. Then as we got older, maybe you give up smoking or alcohol. And then as we got older and cynical, and farther away from the spirit of the thing, I remember a guy who every year said, yeah, I'm giving something up. I'm giving up pole vaulting and watermelon. and at that time, watermelon was definitely not in season during Lent, so I guess you could probably find it today. But back then, that was really, he was making a statement there. He wasn't giving nothing up. So that was his way of saying that Lent didn't have much meaning for him anymore. And that's really the key, keeping it meaningful. How do we do that? Human beings can take just about anything, and I mean anything, including something that's supposed to be a spiritual practice, and turn it into a showcase for the ego. There's another religious teacher that I've admired over the years, Father Thomas Keating. Now, he passed away just this last year. But he was another religious person like the Dalai Lama who's gone beyond religion. He was the abbot at several major monasteries over the years in the United States, and in one of his books he tells this story about one of the new brothers at the monastery. This monk had gone through quite a transformation, which led him to take his monastic vows. He was a wild partier, a heavy drinker, and finally it was a 12-step program that led him into the monastery. Now, at most monasteries, fasting is a common practice, not just at Lent, but year-round. They do fasting on and off. But when Lent would come around, then they would fast even more. And so this new guy took it on himself to outdo everyone else in terms of how little food he could get by on. And Father Keating was watching him and finally had to call him in and point out to him that he was really just doing the same dance with a different partner. All right? He said, instead of trying to drink everyone under the table, which you were trying to do before, now you're finding a new path to glory where you're going to fast everyone under the table. A new path to glory. It's all about consciousness, the consciousness that we bring to the practice, whatever it is. Our motivation, that's what's important. Positive, negative, cynical, secure, egotistical, altruistic, we get to choose. When Charles Fillmore wrote Keep a True Lent, of course he was talking about consciousness. Now as a child, I never got any such message because I didn't have a Unity Youth program near me. So to me, the practice of giving something up during Lent was really more about doing something that showed that I belonged to that tribe, that I belonged to that group, a tribal ritual. It's what was expected of me if I was going to proudly wear the label Catholic, if I wanted to belong, right? And then by the time you get to your rebellious teen years, it becomes pole vaulting and watermelon. All of a sudden, all the meaning is gone. It wasn't really actually until I got to what I call my Buddhist period that I started developing an understanding of what was supposed to be going on during that Lenten season. You know, Buddhists, they don't have Lent, but they do have something that I think is quite similar, especially in the Zen Buddhist tradition. They have a season of 3 months called Ango, twice a year, 3 months where they intensify their practice. They have longer periods of meditation, they have longer periods of silence and other special activities and study that they would add into the schedule. Now this word Ango, I think I've got it up there, it means literally peaceful dwelling. Peaceful dwelling, think about it. No suffering, no deprivation. The idea is to enhance the sense of inner peace. The extra effort was directed toward establishing inner and outer peace. And it occurred to me that doing this kind of alternating practice, an intense period of practice, and then going back to a more relaxed time of practice, it's a lot like what they recommend for exercising, right? You've heard of intervals? And I'm hearing about this more and more, whether it's running or weightlifting, or I don't know what the particular exercise fad is today, although I hear the latest thing is people beating on rubber balls with sticks. Have you heard about this thing? Some kind of a drumming thing. Whatever it is, you can't exercise at maximum intensity 100% of the time without doing some damage, right? That's the truth. But before we leave the drumming thing, though, I do have to drop this on you. What do a drum solo and a sneeze have in common? You know that it's coming, and you can't do anything to stop it. All right. Back to exercise. If you want to grow, if you want to get stronger, we have to stretch ourselves and go into a period of time doing things with greater intensity, and then we back off. We reap the benefits. You let the body recover, whatever, to reap the benefits of our effort, and then start again. So we go in these intervals. So why not do it on a seasonal basis? Why not do it in accord with the seasons? Because that's one of the great things that early Christianity learned from various non-Christian traditions, was how to honor the cycle of the seasons. This word Lent, for instance, this should be a real good clue to us. The word Lent, there's nothing religious about it. The word Lent is Old English for springtime, or spring season, which comes from an old Germanic word that meant longer days, because that's what's going on now. The days are getting longer. They were connecting with the cycles of nature, in this case, springtime, which in the northern hemisphere at least is a time of rebirth and renewal. Think about this. Another thing we do during the spring season is spring cleaning. Guess where that comes from? Judaism. It's a custom that comes from Judaism, where they would clean the house from top to bottom in preparation for the Passover feast, which, by the way, is what the Last Supper was. So when we start to see these things come together, maybe we can start looking at Lent as an opportunity for spiritual spring cleaning, a time of a little more intense spiritual practice that prepares us for the upcoming time of growth and renewal. So as Charles Fillmore was trying to argue and keep a true Lent, Lent is an idea that has a sound spiritual basis if we approach it from the right state of consciousness. Here's another line from the foreword to his book, which says, we must learn to fast from all unworthy thought and feast on the good and the true and the beautiful. I'll add that. To observe Lent according to the Spirit rather than the letter, we must fast from criticism and condemnation and feast in brotherly love, and you can see how that would go on and on. So to refrain from this and instead do that. So with that in mind, for the next 4 weeks, we're going to work with some of the ideas from Keep a True Lent and a little book that's called The Four Agreements. And you might have heard of that. We actually did the Four Agreements, it's been over 5 years ago since we last talked about it, so I think it might be time for a review, and I think this time of year is probably the perfect time. The Four Agreements with a unity perspective, of course. So next week, the topic is going to be word power. It's going to be the first agreement, which is be impeccable with your word. Charles Fillmore gives us this definition of words that we can work with as we get ready for next week. He said, words are the vehicles through which ideas make themselves manifest. Words that have in them the realization of perfect, everywhere present, always present divine life, and our oneness with this life are dominant in the restoration of life and health. So those are the words that we want to be formulating and expressing. Another way of saying it is that talk isn't cheap. Every word is potentially powerful. So next week we're going to learn about what it means to be impeccable with our word. See you then.